The notifications on the iPhone screen were the only source of light in the penthouse living room, glowing with a message that should have been innocent. Busy at work. Don't wait up. But inside the metallic casing of the flash drive currently plugged into Andrew's laptop, the truth was playing out in 4K resolution, framing a betrayal so calculated it made his hands numb. It wasn't just the infidelity. It was the meticulous documentation of a double life that had been happening right under his nose. If the unraveling of a perfect marriage and the dark, quiet chaos that follows intrigues you, stay with me. There are still many files left to open. The apartment was quiet, the kind of silence that only money could buy in downtown Chicago. It was the 42nd floor, and the triple-paned glass reduced the city's roar to a distant, ambient hum. Andrew sat on the edge of the Italian leather sofa, the glow of his MacBook Pro illuminating the sharp angles of his face. On the screen, a video file was paused at the 0312 mark. It was a recording of his wife, Clara. She was wearing the silk robe he had bought her for their 5th anniversary, the one she said she was saving for special occasions. In the video, she wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking past it, laughing, a glass of wine in her hand. The background wasn't their apartment. It was a hotel room with beige walls and generic art. "Stop filming, Julian," she said in the video, her voice thick with an affection Andrew hadn't heard in years. "Andrew thinks I'm at the printer's office approving the proofs." Andrew didn't blink. He felt a strange, cold pressure in his chest, like he had swallowed a stone. He hit the spacebar. The video continued. The camera moved, the perspective shifted, and the image blurred into tangled sheets and skin. He closed the laptop. The silence returned, heavier this time. On the coffee table, his phone buzzed, vibrating against the glass surface. The screen lit up with a notification from Clara. "Busy at work, putting out a fire with the sprawling layout. Don't wait up. Love you." Andrew stared at the message. The timestamp was 8:42 p.m. He looked back at the silver flash drive sticking out of the side of his laptop. He had found it 20 minutes ago, buried at the bottom of her gym bag when he went to borrow her noise-canceling headphones. It was labeled Backup 2023, innocuous and boring. He had expected spreadsheets or high-res images of the Plaza project. He stood up. His movements were mechanical, stripped of panic. He walked to the master bedroom, the walk-in closet stretching out before him like a boutique. He grabbed her overnight Louis Vuitton duffel from the top shelf. He didn't throw her clothes. He didn't rip them from the hangers. He folded them. He packed a week's worth of business suits, 2 pairs of heels, her running shoes, and her toiletries. He moved with the efficiency of an architect clearing a site for demolition. Every fold was a sentence. Every zipped compartment was a judgment. When the bag was full, he zipped it shut and carried it to the front door. He placed it gently in the hallway, then walked to the wall-mounted smart home panel. His fingers hovered over the security settings. User, Clara. Status, admin. Andrew tapped edit, then revoke access. The screen prompted. "Are you sure you want to remove this user from the biometric entry system?" He pressed yes. He then opened the building management app on his phone. He requested the concierge to hold a package in the lobby for pickup. He took the elevator down, the duffel bag heavy in his hand, his reflection in the mirrored doors showing a man who looked remarkably composed for someone whose life had just incinerated. He left the bag with the night porter, a young man named Elias who looked confused. "Mr. Vance? Is Mrs. Vance traveling tonight?" "She is," Andrew said, his voice steady. "She won't be coming back up." Andrew returned to the penthouse. The air felt thinner. He sat back down on the sofa, opened the laptop again, and pulled up the text message thread. He typed slowly, ensuring there were no typos, no signs of shaking hands. Don't come home. I found the flash drive. He hit send. Then, he watched the 3 dots of the typing indicator appear almost instantly, bubbling up like panic rising to the surface of water. The taxi ride from the River North Bistro to their building usually took 15 minutes. Clara made the driver do it in 8. She sat in the back seat, the leather cool against her legs, clutching her phone as if she could squeeze a retraction out of it. The 3 dots that had appeared after Andrew's message had vanished, leaving only the terrifying finality of his words. I found the flash drive. She hadn't replied. There was no reply to that. There was only presence. She needed to be in the room, to touch his arm, to use the soft, persuasive voice that had charmed zoning boards and city planners for a decade. She needed to control the narrative before it solidified into history. The cab screeched to a halt in front of the Meridian. Clara threw a crumpled 20 at the driver and scrambled out, her heels clicking frantically against the pavement. The Chicago wind was biting, whipping her coat around her legs, but she didn't feel the cold. She felt only the nausea of exposure. She reached the main glass doors. Usually, the scanner would recognize the fob in her purse, and the doors would slide open with a welcoming hiss. Tonight, the small LED light on the panel blinked an angry, solid red. Access denied. She tried again, pressing her thumb against the biometric reader. Access denied. Panic, sharp and hot, spiked in her chest. She looked through the glass. Elias, the night porter, was standing behind the marble desk. He wasn't looking at his monitor. He was looking at the floor, studiously avoiding her gaze. Beside the desk sat her Louis Vuitton duffel bag, looking absurdly small in the cavernous, backlit lobby. "Elias," she called out, her voice muffled by the heavy glass. She waved, a gesture that started as authoritative but ended as desperate. Elias looked up, his expression pained. He walked over to the door but didn't open it. He pressed the intercom button. "Mrs. Vance," his voice crackled through the speaker, tinny and apologetic. I'm sorry. Mr. Vance removed your credentials. He said you have a bag here." "Open the door, Elias. It's a misunderstanding." Clara's voice pitched up, cracking the veneer of her professional composure. "Let me up." "I can't, ma'am. Strict instructions. If I override it, the system logs it." "I could lose my job." Clara stared at him, then at the panel of buzzers. She punched the button for penthouse 42. 42 floors above, the video intercom screen on the kitchen wall lit up. Andrew was standing there, a glass of water in his hand. He watched the black and white feed. Clara's face was distorted by the wide-angle lens, her eyes wide, her hair windswept. She looked like a stranger, or perhaps, he thought. This was the first time he was seeing her clearly, stripped of the lighting and angles she so carefully curated. "Andrew." Her voice came through the system, breathless. "Andrew, please, pick up. We need to talk about this. It's not what you think." Andrew pressed the talk button but kept his finger hovering over end. "It is exactly what I think," Andrew said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. It echoed in the empty kitchen. "I watched the file from September 12th, the one from the hotel in the Loop. You weren't at a client dinner." On the small screen, Clara flinched. The specificity of the date hit her like a physical blow. She slumped slightly against the doorframe. "Andrew, let me in." Don't do this to us. Not like this. Not over a machine. You did this to us, Andrew replied. There is no us in that apartment anymore. Just me and the evidence. Where am I supposed to go? She was crying now, the mascara she had applied for her late work meeting smudging under her eyes. You're resourceful, Clara. You always have been. Andrew looked at the image of his wife, the woman he had built a life with, the woman he had planned to grow old with. He felt a phantom ache in his hand, the urge to open the door, to fix it, to let her explain it away. But then the image of the flash drive, sitting on the coffee table like a bullet casing, flashed in his mind. Goodbye, Clara. He severed the connection. The screen went dark. Down on the street level, the silence of the speaker was louder than the wind. Clara stood frozen for a moment, the humiliation burning her skin. She could feel the eyes of the concierge, and perhaps the neighbors walking their dogs across the street. She looked at her duffel bag inside the lobby. Elias cracked the door just enough to slide the bag out onto the sidewalk, then retreated quickly, locking it behind him. Clara stood alone on the concrete. She grabbed the handle of the bag, her knuckles white. She turned away from the building, the grand glass tower she used to call home now just a monolith of reflection, showing her nothing but her own ruin. She pulled her phone out and dialed the only other number she could think of, even though she knew it was a mistake. The concept of time dissolved inside the penthouse. Andrew had closed the blackout blinds, turning the living room into a cave illuminated only by the artificial blue glow of monitors. It had been 72 hours since he changed the locks. He hadn't gone to the firm. He hadn't answered the 34 missed calls from Clara, nor the tentative texts from their mutual friends asking if everything was okay. He was working. On the sleek dining table, usually reserved for catered dinner parties, Andrew had set up a command center. His laptop was connected to the main television screen. A legal pad sat to his right, covered in his precise, all-caps handwriting. He was approaching the destruction of his marriage the same way he approached a failing structural integrity report, systematically, clinically, and without mercy. The flash drive was a labyrinth. It wasn't just a repository of guilt. It was a museum of a dying relationship. Andrew clicked on a folder labeled Drafts Sentiments. It contained unsent emails and video logs recorded on Clara's phone, then offloaded to the drive to save space. He opened a video file dated 8 months ago. On the massive 85-inch screen, Clara appeared, sitting in her car. It was raining. The windshield wipers beat a rhythmic tempo that echoed in the silent apartment. "He got the promotion today," Clara said to the camera. She looked tired, her eyes red. "We went to dinner to celebrate. He spent 20 minutes talking about the tensile strength of the new alloy materials. He didn't ask me how my day was. He didn't notice I cut my hair." She laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "I feel like I'm married to a blueprint, not a man. He's perfect, and he's absolutely empty." Andrew paused the video. The freeze frame caught Clara in a grimace of despair. He looked down at his hands. They were steady, resting on the mahogany table. Empty. Is that how she saw him? He thought of the dinner she mentioned. He remembered it clearly. He had been excited to share the technical details with her because he respected her intelligence. He thought he was sharing his passion. She saw it as a lecture. He picked up his pen and wrote on the legal pad. Exhibit G. Claim of emotional neglect. Subjective. He forced himself to continue. The timeline he was constructing was horrifying in its detail. He cross-referenced the dates of the video files with his own calendar. May 14th, He was in Tokyo for a conference. Clara was in a hotel room in downtown Chicago with him. July 4th, the company barbecue. Andrew was manning the grill. Clara was texting him from the bathroom. The him had a name, of course. Julian. Andrew had found the folder labeled J. It was full of photos. Selfies of them in bed, shots of dinner plates, blurry captures of inside jokes Andrew would never understand. But it was the nature of the man that struck Andrew the hardest. Julian wasn't a titan of industry. In the videos, he was messy. He was loud. He played the guitar badly and made Clara laugh until she snorted, a sound Andrew hadn't heard in a decade. Julian was chaotic. He was everything Andrew had trained himself not to be. Andrew stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. He pulled back the blind just an inch. The city of Chicago sprawled out below, a grid of order and light. He had built his life on lines, on structure, on the belief that if you built a strong enough foundation, the house would stand. But looking at the reflection in the glass, Andrew realized the foundation hadn't cracked. It had rotted. Clara hadn't just looked for sex. She had looked for oxygen. The betrayal was absolute, unforgivable, and legally damning. But for the first time, Andrew felt the sharp, jagged edge of a different kind of failure. He went back to the table. He needed to finish the audit. He needed to quantify the damage so he could package it up and hand it to a lawyer. It was the only way he knew how to survive. He clicked on the final folder, the most recent one. Inside was a scanned PDF of a document. Andrew zoomed in. It wasn't a love letter. It was a financial disclosure form. Clara had been looking up his assets. She had been forwarding emails from his accountant to Julian. They weren't just having an affair. They were calculating the payout. The sadness that had been encroaching on Andrew's chest evaporated, replaced instantly by a cold, familiar resolve. He wasn't just a husband who had failed to be emotional enough. He was a target. He reached for his phone. He didn't call Clara. He dialed the number for his personal counsel, a man known in the city as the demolitionist. "It's Andrew," he said when the line connected. "I'm ready to file, and I have the leverage." They met at Mercer's, a restaurant chosen specifically for its acoustics. The tables were spaced far enough apart that a conversation could be private, but the room was crowded enough that a scene would be social suicide. Andrew arrived 10 minutes early. He ordered sparkling water and placed a thin manila envelope on the pristine white tablecloth. Clara arrived precisely on time. She looked composed, but Andrew, who had studied her face for 7 years, saw the cracks. Her foundation was a shade too heavy, covering the lack of sleep. She was wearing the navy blazer she usually reserved for crisis management meetings with high-profile clients. It was a tactical choice. She was treating this lunch as a PR disaster to be spun. She sat down, not reaching for his hand. The waiter poured water and vanished. "Andrew," she started, her voice low and controlled. "I'm glad you agreed to meet. The way you handled the other night. It was extreme. Locking me out? That's not you." "You don't know who I am, Clara," Andrew said, his voice flat. "Just like I clearly didn't know you." Clara sighed, a practiced exhale of frustration. She leaned in, lowering her voice further. "I know what you think you saw on that drive, but context matters. Those videos, Julian and I, it was a fantasy. It was role play. People have private lives, Andrew, darker thoughts. It doesn't mean I don't love you." Andrew watched her. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She was trying to make him feel like the voyeur, the intruder who had stumbled upon something He wasn't sophisticated enough to understand. Role play, Andrew repeated. Is that what we call the financial disclosure forms? Did you draft a spreadsheet of my liquid assets as part of a sexual fantasy? Clara froze. Her hand, halfway to her water glass, stopped in midair. The color drained from her face, leaving the makeup sitting on her skin like a mask. I saw the PDF, Clara, Andrew continued, his eyes never leaving hers. Sent to Julian's personal email on the 14th. You weren't just sleeping with him. You were auditing me. It was just a contingency. I was confused. Julian said, Julian, Andrew interrupted, tasting the name like spoiled milk. Let's talk about Julian. Clara straightened her spine, trying to regain ground. He understands me, Andrew. He's passionate. He's an artist. He's not obsessed with order and control like you are. We met at the gallery opening in... I know where you met, Andrew said. He reached for the envelope on the table but didn't open it. He just rested his hand on it. And I know who he is. You think he's some struggling artist you discovered? Some chaotic soul that balances out my rigidity? Clara narrowed her eyes. What are you talking about? Julian creates chaos because he can afford to, Andrew said coldly. He's 26. He's never held a job for more than 6 months. And the only reason he was at that gallery opening, and the only reason he knows anything about my firm's financials, is because of his last name. Andrew leaned forward. His name is Julian Thorne. He is Marcus Thorne's son. The air left Clara's lungs. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Marcus Thorne was the legendary architect who had mentored Andrew. Marcus was the man who had given Andrew his start. The man whose firm Andrew now partnered with on the city's largest projects. You're sleeping with my mentor's son, Andrew clarified, driving the nail in. A boy who has resented me for a decade because his father treats me like the heir he never was. This isn't romance, Clara. It's revenge. And you're just the weapon he's using to smash the windows. Clara looked sick. The narrative she had built, of a passionate, star-crossed love affair, was crumbling. She wasn't the protagonist of a romance. She was a pawn in a patricidal grudge match. I didn't know, she whispered, her voice trembling for real this time. He never said... He wouldn't, Andrew said, standing up. He left the envelope on the table. That envelope contains the divorce petition and a copy of the morality clause in our prenup. You breached it. You get nothing. He signaled the waiter. Check for the lady, please. Andrew walked out of the restaurant, leaving Clara sitting alone among the lunch crowd, the realization of her colossal error settling over her like a shroud. The wind off Lake Michigan was brutal, cutting through the steel skeleton of the Plaza project with a hollow, whistling scream. It was a chaotic environment. Cranes swinging overhead, the deafening rattle of jackhammers, the shout of foremen. But Andrew moved through it with practiced ease. He wore his hard hat and high-visibility vest over his tailored wool coat, checking the tension brackets on the third-floor promenade. He heard Julian before he saw him. It's organic. It needs to breathe, Dad. You can't just grid everything into submission. Andrew turned slowly. Walking across the temporary plywood flooring was Marcus Thorne. Looking weary, and trailing behind him was Julian. In the flesh, Julian was even more jarring than he had been in digital 4K. He was handsome in a disheveled, intentional way. Hair long enough to catch the wind, a scarf wrapped loosely around his neck, boots that had never seen a construction site before today. He was using his hands wildly as he spoke, occupying space, demanding attention. Marcus spotted Andrew and looked relieved. Andrew, Thank God. Explain to my son why we can't use reclaimed driftwood for the primary load-bearing columns. Julian stopped. His eyes locked onto Andrew's. There was a flicker of something there. Not guilt, but a sharp, insolent curiosity. It was the look of a thief assessing the man he had robbed. Andrew, Julian said, a smirk playing on his lips. Clara mentions you often. She says you're precise. The air between them seemed to drop 10 degrees. Andrew looked at the young man. He saw the appeal instantly, and it gutted him. Julian was vibrant. He was messy. He was a raw nerve ending in a world Andrew tried to insulate. Clara, who had spent 10 years polishing her image to match Andrew's sleek, modern aesthetic, must have looked at Julian and felt like she could finally exhale. Precision keeps the building standing, Julian, Andrew said, his voice barely rising above the wind but cutting through the noise perfectly. It prevents collapse. But it's so boring, isn't it? Julian stepped closer, invading Andrew's personal space. He smelled of expensive tobacco and arrogance. Living in a grid? Never coloring outside the lines? I bet it gets suffocating. It was a direct taunt. Julian knew. He knew about the separation, about the flash drive. He was testing Andrew, prodding the robot to see if he would short-circuit. Andrew felt a primal urge to shove Julian toward the exposed edge of the platform. It would be so easy. A tragic accident. But then he looked at Marcus, who was studying blueprints a few feet away, oblivious to the fact that his son was sleeping with his partner's wife. Andrew realized something then. Julian wasn't just a rival, he was a mirror. Andrew had offered Clara safety, status, and silence. Julian offered her noise, drama, and risk. Clara hadn't just wanted a lover. She had wanted to feel something, even if that something was destructive. Structure isn't about being boring, Andrew said, holding Julian's gaze until the younger man blinked. It's about bearing the weight so others don't have to. You'll learn that when you actually build something of your own, instead of just playing in the ruins of what others created. Julian's smile faltered. He opened his mouth to retort, but Andrew had already turned his back. Marcus, Andrew called out, walking toward the older man. The tension readings on the north face are stable. We're ready to pour the concrete. He didn't look back at Julian. He focused on the work. He focused on the concrete, the steel, the math. But as he walked away, the wind felt colder than before. He had won the exchange, but the victory felt hollow. He was the structure, yes. Strong, reliable, unmoving, and entirely alone in the cold, while Julian stood in the background, vibrating with a life Andrew had never known how to touch. The lights in the open-plan studio of Vance and Thorne Architects had automatically dimmed to their night mode, leaving only the emergency exit signs and the lamp on Andrew's desk burning. It was 9:45 p.m. The silence of the empty office was usually Andrew's favorite sound, the sound of productivity without friction. Tonight, it felt like the quiet before a detonation. His phone buzzed on the mahogany surface. It wasn't a text this time. It was an email notification. Sender, Clara Vance. Subject, draft press release for review. Andrew frowned. He clicked the notification. The document wasn't a standard press release. It was a drafted leak to the Chicago Tribune, detailing a temporary liquidity issue the firm had faced 2 quarters ago, a gap in funding that Andrew had covered personally and quietly to avoid panicking the investors. It was confidential, legally protected, and devastating if taken out of context. Before he could process the betrayal, his office line rang. Only 3 people had that direct number. Clara was one of them. He picked up the receiver, his hand heavy. "You're blackmailing me now, Clara?" "I'm negotiating, Andrew." Her voice came through, clear and frighteningly steady. She had abandoned the tears from the intercom and the gaslighting from the restaurant. This was Clara, the PR director, spinning a crisis. "I know the gala is Saturday. I know Marcus is announcing the plaza expansion. You need the investors to see stability. You need the power couple narrative one last time. You want me to pretend," Andrew said, leaning back in his Eames chair, staring at the ceiling. "After everything." "I need this, Andrew. I have a potential offer with a firm in New York, but they value stability. If a messy divorce scandal breaks this week, right before the gala, I lose the offer. And if I lose the offer, I fight you for half of everything. I drag this out for years." She paused, letting the threat hang in the air like smoke. "But," she continued, "if we walk the carpet together on Saturday, if we smile, pose for the photos, and let Marcus have his moment, I will sign the papers on Monday, uncontested. You keep the apartment. You keep the firm." Andrew closed his eyes. It was a cold, transactional equation. She was trading her dignity for a clean exit, and she was using his life's work as collateral. The woman who had once written vows about supporting him in sickness and health was now weaponizing his balance sheet. "You audited me," Andrew said softly. "You spent months digging for dirt just for this moment. I spent months looking for an insurance policy because I knew you," Clara replied, her voice cracking slightly, revealing a sliver of the fear beneath the armor. "I knew if you ever found out, you wouldn't just leave me. You would erase me. I had to protect myself." Andrew looked at the glass wall of his office. He could see his reflection, a man in a suit, alone in a tower he helped build. He despised her in that moment, not with heat, but with a glacial indifference. She thought she was maneuvering him. She thought she was winning a reprieve. She didn't realize that by forcing him to bring her to the gala, she was walking onto his stage, under lights he controlled. "Fine," Andrew said. "Fine?" She sounded surprised by the speed of his capitulation. "We go to the gala. We do the red carpet. We smile." Andrew's voice was devoid of emotion. "But on Sunday morning, you are gone. New York, London, I don't care, as long as you are not in Chicago." "Agreed," Clara exhaled, the relief palpable. "Thank you, Andrew. You're doing the rational thing." "I'm an architect, Clara," he said, reaching for the mouse to delete her email. "I deal in structures, even the temporary ones." He hung up the phone. He sat in the silence for a long time, watching the blinking cursor on his screen. She wanted a performance. He would give her one. He opened his calendar and looked at the entry for Saturday. Annual Architecture Gala, the Drake Hotel. He picked up his pen and drew a harsh, black line through the word gala. Next to it, he wrote a single word, pressing down hard enough to indent the paper. Demolition. The Gold Coast room at the Drake Hotel was a cathedral of old-world money. Crystal chandeliers trembled slightly from the bass of the string quartet playing modern pop covers, and the air smelled of lilies and expensive gin. Andrew Vance stood near the entrance, a flute of champagne untouched in his hand. He wore his tuxedo like armor. Beside him, Clara was a vision in emerald silk. She smiled at a city councilman, her hand resting possessively on Andrew's forearm. Her grip was tight, her nails digging in slightly, a silent reminder of their deal. Smile, endure, leave. "You're doing well," Andrew murmured, not looking at her. He scanned the room, his eyes dissecting the crowd like he was reading a site plan. "I'm doing what I have to," Clara whispered back, her smile never wavering as she waved to a client. "Just get through the toast, and we're done." The crowd parted. Marcus Thorne approached, looking every bit the architectural lion in his velvet dinner jacket. Flanking him, inevitably, was Julian. Julian looked triumphant. He had clearly taken Clara's presence here as a victory, a sign that Andrew had been cowed into submission. He wore a smirk that suggested he knew secrets the rest of the room couldn't fathom. "Andrew! Clara!" Marcus boomed, opening his arms. "The stars of the evening. The plaza expansion is the talk of the room." Andrew stepped forward, shaking Marcus's hand. The flash of a photographer's camera blinded them for a second, freezing the moment in white light. "It's a team effort, Marcus," Andrew said, his voice level. He turned his gaze to Julian. Julian stepped up, swirling his drink. "Ideally, we'll inject some new life into the firm's aesthetic next quarter, right, Andrew? A little less rigid." Clara stiffened beside Andrew. She sensed the shift in atmospheric pressure before anyone else. "Actually," Andrew said, reaching into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket, "I've been thinking about the firm's future and about transparency." He pulled out the silver flash drive. It caught the light of the chandeliers, a small metallic object that looked insignificant in the grand ballroom. Andrew didn't look at Clara. He looked directly at Marcus. "I found this recently," Andrew said, his voice loud enough for the immediate circle to hear, but quiet enough to stay private. "I believe it belongs to Julian. It contains a very detailed record of his extracurricular activities over the last 6 months." Julian's smirk vanished. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he might faint. Clara made a small, strangled sound, her hand dropping from Andrew's arm as if burned. Marcus looked confused. He reached out and took the drive. "What is this?" "The new renders." "No," Andrew said, smoothing his lapels. "It's the reason I'm resigning, Marcus. Effective immediately." The word resigning hit the group like a physical blow. Marcus stared at the drive, then at his son, whose terrified silence was a confession in itself. "Andrew, what are you talking about?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping to a growl. "Watch the drive, Marcus," Andrew said. He finally looked at Julian, whose arrogance had dissolved into pure, unadulterated panic. "It's all there. The video logs, the financial audits, the theft of proprietary data. He documented everything. He's quite the archivist." Andrew turned to Clara. She was trembling, her eyes wide with the realization that he hadn't just broken the deal. He had incinerated it. He had stripped her of her leverage by removing the one thing she held hostage: his career. He no longer cared about the firm. "I believe you two have a lot to discuss," Andrew said. He signaled a passing waiter, placed his full glass of champagne on the tray, and walked away. He moved through the stunned silence of his small circle, past the photographers, and toward the exit. He didn't look back. The noise of the party resumed behind him, a swell of laughter and music. But for Andrew, the only sound was the clicking of the heavy hotel doors closing behind him, sealing the wreckage inside. The sound of the L train rattling past the window was loud, a rhythmic steel-on-steel screech that would have been audible even through the glass. But Andrew didn't mind. In the penthouse, the silence had been oppressive, a vacuum where secrets could fester. Here, in the converted warehouse loft in the West Loop, the noise felt like life. It had been 90 days since the gala. The space was mostly empty. The polished Italian furniture was gone, sold, or left behind. In its place stood a simple drafting table, positioned to catch the northern light, and a single leather armchair. The floors were scarred timber, the walls exposed brick. It was a space that wasn't finished, a project that required work. Andrew walked to the kitchen island, a slab of poured concrete, and picked up the letter that had arrived that morning. It was on heavy, cream-colored bond paper, decree of dissolution of marriage. It was done. The legal battle he had anticipated never really happened. After the gala, after the public humiliation and the revelation of the financial theft, Clara's fight had evaporated. Marcus Thorne had been ruthless. He hadn't just fired Julian. He had quietly ensured that the industry knew why. Julian was currently finding himself in Southeast Asia, cut off from the family trust. Clara had moved to New York, but the prestige job she had leveraged against Andrew had disappeared the moment the rumors of the audit surfaced. In the high-stakes world of corporate architecture, incompetence was forgivable, but corporate espionage was a death sentence. She was working for a boutique real estate firm in Queens now. Andrew had heard she was living in a studio apartment. He felt no satisfaction in that, only a dull, distant ache. He set the divorce decree down next to a cup of black coffee. He walked over to the drafting table. A fresh sheet of vellum was taped down, pristine and white. He picked up a charcoal pencil, feeling the familiar weight of the wood in his hand. For 20 years, Andrew had designed fortresses. He had built skyscrapers wrapped in glass that reflected the world but let nothing in. He had approached his marriage the same way, creating a structure that looked perfect from the street but lacked the warmth to sustain life inside. He had been a good provider, a loyal husband, and a terrible partner. He had treated Clara like a client whose needs could be met with logic and budget, missing the rot in the foundation until the floor fell out. He wasn't innocent. He was just the one who followed the rules in a game that Clara had decided to cheat at. He looked at the blank page. He wasn't going to start a firm. Not yet. He had enough savings to sit still for a while, to listen to the trains, to feel the draft from the old windows. He touched the tip of the pencil to the paper. He didn't draw a grid. He didn't draw a straight line. He let his hand move loosely, sketching a curve. It was an archway, an entrance, something open. He realized he was terrified. The solitude was absolute. There was no one to text, no one to wait up for, no one to impress. He was 42 years old, and he was starting over from the ground up. But as the charcoal moved across the paper, leaving a trail of dark dust, Andrew took a breath. The old structure was demolished. The debris was cleared. For the first time in his life, he wasn't building to protect himself. He was just drawing to see what might happen next. He kept sketching until the sun went down, the streetlights outside turning the room amber, the first lines of a new blueprint finally taking shape in the dark.